What if everyone planted a tree on their birthday? Picture this. It's your birthday. Instead of blowing out candles in a dimly lit room, you're standing under an open sky, hands wrapped around the rough wooden handle of a shovel. Beside you, a young tree, its leaves trembling in the wind, waits for its first home in the earth. Your friends and family gather around, not with wrapped gifts, but with watering cans, compost, and encouragement. When the last scoop of soil falls into place, you step back and know that you've left something behind that will outlive you. In this imagined world, that scene isn't rare, it's universal. From the poorest villages to the wealthiest cities, every single person plants a tree on their birthday. It's not just a cultural quirk. It's a deeply ingrained ritual that ties the most personal day of your life to the health of the planet. Babies are carried from maternity wards straight to nurseries where their first sapling is chosen. Centenarians celebrate by planting in honor of the decades they've lived, their gnarled hands pressing down the soil just as firmly as the young. It started as an idea so simple, it seemed almost silly. What if every birthday meant another tree in the ground? But when you multiply that by the nearly 8 billion people on Earth, the result becomes staggering. Every single year, billions of trees take root, stretching from deserts where drought-resistant species dig deep for water, to crowded metropolises where green rooftops host miniature forests. The skyline of New York softens under a crown of leaves. The Sahara begins to sprout green arteries across its sand. Even in places long stripped bare, nature begins to stitch itself back together. In this world, birthday parties don't vanish into memory after a day. They leave a living, breathing reminder. Families visit the same spot year after year to see how their trees have grown. Children can measure their own height against the trunk they planted as toddlers. Streets that were once concrete heat traps are now shaded, cooler, and filled with birdsong. And the act itself, simple, physical, grounding, becomes a shared moment of reflection. You've grown another year older, and so has the earth. But together, you're giving it more life. It's a tradition so small in the moment, yet so monumental in its collective force, that it has the power to change not just landscapes, but the way humanity sees its place in the natural world. This is the beginning of that story. To grasp the scale of change, we have to step back into the world as it was before this tradition took root. Our planet in the early 21st century was caught in a dangerous paradox. Humanity depended on forests for air, water, and climate stability, yet destroyed them at a staggering rate. Every year, over 10 million hectares of forest vanished, swallowed by farmland, devoured by logging, or paved over for expanding cities. Ancient rainforests were reduced to silent fields of stumps. Carbon dioxide levels climbed higher than at any point in human history, trapping heat in the atmosphere and fueling extreme weather. Tree planting was not a foreign concept back then. There were charities, government projects, even international campaigns promising billions of saplings. But these efforts often struggled. Funding dried up, political will faltered, and the sheer scale of destruction outpaced any restoration. Planting a few million trees a year felt noble, but it was like throwing pebbles into a river hoping to stop its flow. Technology existed that could have helped. AI capable of mapping degraded land for reforestation, drones that could drop seed pods over inaccessible terrain, genetic engineering to create resilient tree species. But these tools were often trapped in research labs or used only in small-scale trials. Most people saw environmental action as something big organizations did, not a personal responsibility. Birthdays came and went with balloons and cake, leaving no trace beyond photographs and, perhaps, a few discarded paper plates. Socially, the planet was restless. Climate protests grew louder, but global agreements were slow and watered down. Younger generations demanded systemic change, while older ones warned of economic disruption. Meanwhile, air quality in megacities choked millions, heat waves became more frequent, and droughts carved deep scars into agricultural regions. The signs of crisis were everywhere, yet collective action felt sluggish, fractured by politics and geography. And yet, under the surface, There was a quiet hunger for something unifying, an action so simple, so personal, that it could cut through the noise and touch every life. People were ready for a movement that didn't just talk about the planet's survival, but tied it directly to their own lives. The stage was set for an idea that would turn birthdays from private celebrations into an annual pledge to the Earth. The idea's spark came from an unexpected source, a global children's summit in Nairobi, organized to give young voices a platform in shaping climate policy. Most adults treated it as symbolic, a feel-good event without real impact. But on the second day, a 12-year-old from Brazil stood before the assembly and asked a simple question. If we all have birthdays, why don't we give the Earth a gift on that day? She proposed that each person plant a tree every year, turning the calendar into a rhythm of renewal. The suggestion drew polite applause, but it was the next speaker, a respected climate scientist, who transformed it from a charming notion into a revelation. On stage, he did the math. 8 billion people meant 8 billion new trees each year. Factor in births, and the number climbed even higher. In just a decade, this could mean more trees planted than were lost to deforestation over the same period. The room fell silent. For a moment, everyone grasped the sheer scale of possibility. Media outlets latched onto the idea instantly. Headlines called it the birthday revolution and the gift that could save the world. Social media erupted with mock-up videos of celebrities planting trees on their birthdays. Politicians, sensing an opportunity to unite voters, pledged to make it a national policy. Within months, the United Nations drafted the Birthday Tree Accord, a non-binding resolution urging all member states to adopt the tradition. The first official year was unlike anything the world had seen. On January 1st, crowds in Sydney gathered in parks at dawn, planting the first birthday trees of the new era. By the time the sun set in Hawaii, more than 20 million people had participated. Governments provided free saplings suited to local climates. Drones delivered seedlings to remote villages. Cities opened temporary planting stations in squares and stadiums. The energy was infectious. Families turned planting into annual reunions. Schools marked student birthdays with trips to nearby forests. Even corporations joined in, giving employees paid time off to plant their trees. For once, environmental action felt joyous instead of burdensome. People were not just told to save the planet, they were invited to celebrate it. By year's end, satellites showed visible swaths of new green across continents. The Earth, for the first time in decades, was measurably gaining more trees than it was losing. Humanity had stumbled upon something rare, a shared act of care, synchronized across cultures, nations, and generations. It was the beginning of a tradition that would reshape the planet's story. In the first 5 years, the world felt the change in ways both subtle and spectacular. City streets that once shimmered with heat in the summer now had pockets of cool shade. Rooftop gardens became the go-to venue for apartment dwellers without access to open soil, their skyline view now softened by a patchwork of green. In megacities like Tokyo, New York, and Lagos, air quality indices showed modest but measurable improvements. Asthma rates among children began to decline in some of the most polluted districts. Economically, an unexpected boom took shape. Local nurseries thrived, no longer dependent on seasonal demand. A new industry of birthday forestry emerged, businesses specializing in personalized planting experiences, from selecting unique species to engraving small plaques with the planter's name and year. Rural communities found new income streams by cultivating saplings for urban centers, and logistics companies adapted to deliver millions of young trees with precision timing. Culturally, the tradition embedded itself faster than anyone predicted. Social media became flooded each day with photos of freshly planted saplings tagged with a universal hashtag. Birthdays turned into mini environmental campaigns, and people took pride in seeing their yearly contribution grow taller in side-by-side comparison photos. Schools began mapping student trees and organizing field trips to check on them, giving children a sense of tangible connection to their environment. But not all voices were celebratory. Ecologists warned of potential pitfalls. monocultures forming when certain popular species were planted too widely, risking disease outbreaks. Others pointed out that without proper care, many trees could die before maturity, turning the effort into a feel-good illusion rather than genuine restoration. There were also urban planning challenges. In some cities, space was limited, forcing plantings into less than ideal spots where roots could damage infrastructure. Despite these concerns, the overall mood was electric. For once, climate action wasn't framed in the language of sacrifice, but of celebration. People who had never thought of themselves as environmentalists now had a personal stake in the Earth's well-being. Every sprouting leaf was a reminder that they had done something, small alone, monumental together. The short-term effects went beyond cleaner air or cooler streets. They touched something psychological, the sense that humanity could act as a single species with a shared purpose. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was proof that even in a fractured world, a simple tradition could unite billions in a common cause. The first green ripples were spreading fast, and few could yet see how far they would reach. By the 25th year of the tradition, the planet had transformed in ways few had predicted. Vast belts of green now traced along the edges of deserts, acting as natural windbreaks that slowed the spread of sand into farmland. In regions once devastated by logging, mature forests returned, bringing with them the songs of birds long thought gone. In satellite imagery, continents appeared as though they had been repainted, patches of fresh emerald replacing the browns and grays of degraded land. The climate responded, albeit slowly. Average temperatures in some formerly scorched regions dropped by 1 to 2 degrees. Rainfall patterns in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia became more stable, reducing the cycles of drought and flood that had plagued them for generations. Certain endangered species, like the Amur leopard and the Philippine eagle, found new breeding grounds within these regenerated forests. Yet these successes carried complications. The massive scale of planting began to shift the balance of land use. In some countries, farmland gave way to birthday groves, sparking debates over food security. Urban infrastructure was tested as root systems encroached on sewer lines, cracked pavement, and disrupted underground utilities. In a few river basins, dense reforestation altered water flow so dramatically that downstream communities had to relocate. Geopolitically, the Green Revolution reshaped influence. Nations with large, well-maintained forests became vital players in global carbon trading and climate negotiations. Water-rich countries with forest-fed rivers gained new bargaining power over arid neighbors. Borders once defined by fences or checkpoints were now marked by living walls of trees, changing both the symbolism and practicality of territorial lines. On a personal level, the tradition deepened generational ties. Families made pilgrimages to visit multi-decade groves, tracing their lineage not just through photographs, but through the trunks and rings of trees planted by parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Tree birthdays became as important as weddings or graduations, with communities gathering to celebrate the planting anniversaries of the oldest groves. But cracks began to show in this green utopia. Tree theft emerged as a black market problem, with rare hardwood birthday trees illegally harvested and sold. Invasive species, introduced accidentally during mass plantings, began to threaten local ecosystems. And while the global canopy had expanded, experts worried that the singular focus on trees overlooked the importance of other habitats like grasslands and wetlands. The planet was undeniably greener, and in many ways healthier, but it was also more complex, with a new web of ecological, social, and political dynamics that humanity would need to navigate. What had started as a simple gift to the Earth was now a force shaping the very architecture of civilization. The success of the birthday tree tradition was not merely the product of goodwill. It was the result of science and technology working in harmony with human ritual. At its core, the process was rooted in biology's most elegant equation, photosynthesis. Each tree acted as a living carbon pump, drawing in CO2 from the air, binding carbon into wood and roots, and releasing oxygen back into the atmosphere, Over decades, billions of these biological machines reshaped the planet's carbon budget. But in this new world, trees were no longer left to nature alone. Genetic engineering had revolutionized their capabilities. Botanists designed saplings that could mature in 10 years instead of 50, store up to 5 times more carbon, and adapt to extreme conditions, whether surviving months without rain or thriving in urban smog. Some species were modified to resist pests and diseases, preventing the collapse of monocultures that had worried ecologists in the early years. Technology also changed the way planting was planned. AI systems analyzed satellite imagery, soil chemistry, and climate data to decide exactly where each birthday tree should go. These algorithms didn't just look for empty space, they modeled how a tree's presence would influence local water cycles, biodiversity, and even regional weather patterns decades into the future. This ensured that each planting contributed to a broader, balanced ecological network rather than disrupting it. Urban environments posed a unique challenge. There was simply not enough ground space to accommodate every birthday planting. Architects and engineers responded by integrating trees into buildings, vertical forests cascading from balconies, indoor atriums with species that filtered air, even skyscrapers with root chambers and irrigation systems built into their frames. These innovations allowed cities to maintain their density while still expanding their green footprint. Water management became another pillar of the system. In arid regions, hydrologists developed soil gels that could hold moisture for weeks, ensuring saplings survived their most vulnerable early stages. In wetter climates, bioengineered root systems prevented erosion and filtered pollutants before they reached waterways. What emerged over decades was a planetary-scale life support system, designed with the precision of an engineered machine, but powered by the simple act of planting. Science made it possible for billions of individual gestures to work as one coordinated climate intervention. And, perhaps most remarkably, it turned environmental restoration into something personal, an act tied to the rhythm of human life itself. Every birthday was both a celebration of survival and a small, measurable push against planetary decline. It was bound to happen. By the 50th year of the birthday tree tradition, the momentum that had once seemed unstoppable began to show dangerous cracks. The sheer volume of annual plantings, billions of new trees every year, was no longer perfectly aligned with ecological needs. Forests thickened beyond their natural limits, choking out other vital ecosystems. Grasslands that once supported unique wildlife vanished under canopies of fast-growing trees. Wetlands dried as roots pulled too much water from the soil, altering the hydrology of entire regions. The shift was subtle at first. Migratory birds missing from certain areas, native flowers failing to bloom, rivers running lower than expected. But the warning signs escalated. Insects that thrived on dense, unbroken forest corridors began to spread unchecked. Leaf-eating caterpillars stripped entire swaths of trees bare, and the populations of their natural predators could not keep up. Crop failures followed in neighboring agricultural zones as pest outbreaks spilled from forests into farmland. Urban centers were not immune. Decades of planting without careful rotation left cities wrestling with invasive root systems, buckling sidewalks, cracking foundations, and clogging sewer lines. Maintenance costs soared. In some places, overgrown groves became fire hazards, and the first massive urban wildfires linked to birthday plantings captured global headlines. The crisis deepened when climate models revealed a new twist. While forests absorbed CO2, their rapid expansion in certain latitudes also altered local albedo, the Earth's reflectivity, causing unexpected warming in some regions. Entire climate agreements had to be revisited. The same movement that had been hailed as a planetary savior now stood accused of pushing ecosystems toward instability. The political fallout was immediate. Environmental ministries faced public outrage. Some governments called for a suspension of the tradition, sparking fierce cultural backlash. For many, planting on one's birthday had become a sacred act, tied to identity and heritage. To stop it felt like erasing decades of collective hope. Protesters marched under banners that read, Don't cut our future, and the forest is our family. For the first time, humanity faced a painful truth. Even acts of care, when scaled without restraint, could cause harm. The Green Revolution had reached a tipping point, and without intervention, the very forests planted in celebration could become the seeds of a new environmental disaster. The planet had been given lungs, but now it risked suffocating under its own breath. The turning point came when the crisis could no longer be ignored. Forests were overgrown, pests were rampant, and the infrastructure of cities was cracking under the weight of roots. Yet abandoning the birthday tree tradition outright was unthinkable, too deeply woven into human culture, too symbolic of hope. Instead, the world set out to redesign it. Grassroots movements took the lead. In villages, towns, and cities, citizens formed tree harmony councils to coordinate local planting, ensuring the right species grew in the right places. Farmers were brought into the conversation, balancing reforestation with the preservation of grasslands and croplands. Communities adopted a one birthday, one ecosystem approach, sometimes planting trees, other times restoring wetlands, rewilding grasslands, or rehabilitating coral reefs. Science provided tools to guide this shift. AI models began simulating decades of ecological development for every potential planting site, factoring in biodiversity, hydrology, and even pest population dynamics. Satellite imagery was updated daily to monitor forest health, allowing rapid intervention before small issues became disasters. Drones and robotics were repurposed not just to plant, but to prune, thin, and diversify forests. Urban innovation flourished. Architects created vertical forests to absorb some of the planting demand without crowding streets and underground infrastructure. Sky groves on high-rise rooftops became urban sanctuaries, complete with irrigation systems and pollinator-friendly gardens. In older neighborhoods, specialized urban foresters were tasked with managing root systems, replacing species that threatened foundations with gentler alternatives. The birthday ritual itself evolved. Families still gathered with saplings, but the act was often paired with stewardship duties, checking on the health of last year's planting, replacing trees that hadn't survived, or contributing to community biodiversity projects. Children learned that their role wasn't just to add to the green, but to care for it. Even politics adapted. International agreements now recognized ecological equity, ensuring that nations with overforested regions could redirect birthday plantings to countries in need of green cover. Tree credits were traded much like carbon credits, encouraging a global balance rather than unchecked local expansion. The crisis had forced humanity to grow wiser. The green surge that once threatened to overwhelm the planet was now a carefully orchestrated symphony, with every planting contributing to a broader harmony. What began as a joyful act of growth had matured into a disciplined art of balance, proof that humanity could learn from its own excesses without losing the heart of what made the tradition so powerful. A century after the first birthday tree was planted, Earth bore little resemblance to the planet of the early 21st century. The green canopy was no longer a chaotic surge of uncontrolled growth, but a living, breathing network carefully managed by human hands and guided by advanced ecological intelligence. From orbit, the planet gleamed with interconnected corridors of forest, grassland, and wetland, each ecosystem supporting the next in a balance that felt almost deliberate, because it was. Cities had adapted seamlessly. Skyscrapers doubled as vertical forests, their facades draped with living walls that filtered air and cooled entire blocks. Rooftop sky groves became public gathering spaces, where birthday plantings happened dozens of floors above the streets. Urban planners worked in tandem with ecologists, ensuring that each year's plantings aligned with biodiversity needs rather than merely adding to numbers. The concrete jungle had evolved into a genuine urban forest, one where humans and wildlife coexisted without constant conflict. Beyond the cities, rural landscapes flourished. Deserts that once expanded relentlessly were now held in check by belts of drought-resistant trees, creating microclimates that supported farming communities. Rivers that had shrunk to trickles in the previous century now flowed year-round, fed by forested watersheds that retained rainfall and released it slowly. Migratory birds, once endangered, now crossed continents along green highways, stopping at birthday groves that doubled as way stations. Economically, the birthday ecology had become a cornerstone of global stability. Forest products, from timber to medicinal plants, were harvested sustainably, with strict generational rotation cycles. Communities earned income not only from their trees but also from ecotourism, as people traveled to visit their ancestral groves or famous centennial forests planted in the early years of the tradition. Carbon markets had evolved into biodiversity markets, rewarding regions for maintaining ecological balance rather than sheer tree counts. Culturally, the tradition had deepened into something more than planting. Families passed down the care of certain groves like heirlooms, and the stories of each tree became part of collective memory. Some groves held trees planted by 5 generations, their trunks wrapped with plaques marking every birthday since the first. Annual festivals celebrated not just the act of planting, but the act of tending. A reminder that longevity came not from the number of seeds in the soil, but from the hands willing to nurture them. The world wasn't perfect. Climate pressures still tested the system, and some regions required constant vigilance. But humanity had proven capable of sustaining a global, cooperative tradition for over a century. The birthday tree had grown from a single sapling into a planetary legacy, its roots reaching into the heart of human identity. And as the next planting season approached, the question was no longer whether people would plant. It was where and how their contribution could weave into the living tapestry that Earth had become. Looking back over a century of birthday forests, it's clear the tradition reshaped more than the planet's landscapes. It reshaped humanity itself. What began as a whimsical what if became proof that small, consistent actions, when multiplied by billions, could alter the trajectory of the Earth. It wasn't a technological miracle or a political decree that achieved it, but the simple act of individuals showing up year after year, spade in hand, ready to give back to the soil. The lesson was never just about trees. It was about rhythm, responsibility, and resilience. Birthdays became markers not of personal indulgence, but of shared stewardship. People began to see themselves not as consumers of the Earth's resources, but as caretakers entrusted with its renewal. The tradition instilled patience. Planting a tree meant accepting that its full gift would be for future generations, not for oneself. In a culture obsessed with immediacy, this slow gift became a radical act. The journey was not without its missteps. Overplanting, ecosystem imbalances, and the green crisis of the mid-century reminded the world that good intentions alone are never enough. Even hope must be guided by humility and science. The evolution of the tradition, from unchecked expansion to mindful ecological design, was itself a mirror of humanity's growth. We learned to listen, to adapt, to admit mistakes, and to balance ambition with wisdom. Perhaps the most profound change was psychological. The birthday tree made climate action tangible, personal, and enduring. A single sapling could become a lifetime's anchor, something to visit, to measure one's years against, to pass on as part of a living heritage. The act transcended politics, language, and borders. In planting a tree, a child in Mongolia and a retiree in Brazil were part of the same quiet global conversation. We are here. We care. We will leave this place better than we found it. Now, in this greener world, the air tastes cleaner, the summers feel softer, and the horizon is stitched with the silhouettes of forests born from billions of birthdays. But the question remains, what else could we achieve if we treated every milestone in life as a chance to give back? Weddings, graduations, even ordinary Tuesdays. How many other moments could we turn into gifts for the generations to come? In the rustle of leaves and the whisper of wind through ancient groves, the earth holds its answer. And perhaps, on your next birthday, you'll hold a sapling in your hands and ask yourself, not just how old am I now, but what will I grow from here? So, After all these years of planting, tending, and learning, we're left with a question that lingers longer than the echo of any applause or celebration. What legacy are you building? The birthday tree tradition shows us that even the smallest rituals, when shared across billions of lives, can become a force that shapes the future. If a single day each year could green entire continents, imagine what other changes we could make by uniting our actions. Maybe the answer to our biggest problems isn't hidden in some distant breakthrough or undiscovered technology, but in the small choices we commit to again and again. The planet is alive with the proof of what we can do together. The forests we've grown are not just a monument to our commitment. They're a reminder that the future is always planted in the present. So, when your next birthday arrives, take a moment to think about more than the candles. Think about the roots you could set down, the shade you could offer, and the life you could help nurture. Then ask yourself, what if your legacy could grow tall enough to touch the sky,